Morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Anybody here from Detroit or spend time there at all? A couple? Anybody here know what a parcel is in the non-package term? Parcels? Properties? Okay. You probably hear parcel a lot in my talk. I've become kind of a parcel nerd. Parcels are the shapes that define the properties that have addresses in our world. And you'll see why in a minute, have come to view reality as a series of invisible grids that define space and ownership and land use and property taxes and all manner of things that may not sound sexy and were not sexy to me going back 5 years ago, and have become incredibly sexy because they say a lot about how our cities function and don't function, and they say a lot about how Detroit functions and does not function. So as mentioned, CEO of a mapping company based in Detroit, mapping cities at the parcel level, been in Detroit for the last 5 years, came to Detroit from New York and from San Francisco, where I was involved in the technology startup scene, whatever you want to call it, going to the cities where you're supposed to go if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, right? And then early 2009, shortly after the global financial meltdown, I think I was doing some soul searching and was interested in what other cities are we not looking at all that have huge problems that could possibly be assisted by information technology that are just not places where you go. They're places where if you say you want to go there, if you're interested in them, people in the Valley, people in New York, especially at the time, would kind of laugh at you. Let's see, my slides up here. Of course, slightly out of order. So what we're looking at here, okay. So when I moved to Detroit, one of the things that I was interested in that I'd been reading about was this idea, it's not just an idea, it was a reality, the $500 house, right? The $1 house, the house that someone will pay you to take. And not understanding how real estate could possibly work this way, because everywhere else, real estate's incredibly valuable. The idea of purchasing something for that price is intriguing, and underlying it is this question of how could a condition like that possibly even exist? So when I arrived in the city, one of the first naive questions out of my mouth was, where are these properties? What do they look like? And somebody pointed me to this occurrence called the Wayne County Tax Foreclosure Auction. So every year, Wayne County, the county that Detroit is the majority of, holds this humongous tax foreclosure sale where when properties don't pay their taxes for 3 years, county forecloses on them, auctions the properties, first for the back taxes, and then for $500. There's your prototypical generator of the $500 house. Now they're spitting out thousands, tens of thousands of these $500 houses through tax foreclosure every year, and the way that they were managing information about these properties was this. You could go once a year and get a listed phone book with essentially alphabetical addresses of where these properties were. No one in the city was informed adequately about where these properties were. Nobody was informed how these properties got to be this way. Nobody working in other departments that had to do with building inspections and demolition and cleanup or trying to put vacated properties back to productive use or sell them to people had any idea how the system worked. And all the information in the city was essentially trapped in kind of a 1960s, 1970s, whatever, old-timey filing cabinet paradigm, where this was the best you could do. And I know a lot of cities are kind of in this situation as well, but you add Detroit's situation to that, where you've got massive population loss, you've got declining city revenues, lack of services, and you've got a disaster that unfortunately really hardworking, really passionate people are trying to solve without the adequate information tools to do it. So the work that has grown out of that from our side is going, okay, so if we've got all these property problems, we've got all this tax foreclosure, we've got all this lack of revenue collection, we have all these problems in the form of blight that are actually opportunities for people. If we could advertise them properly, if we could help city government manage them properly, we need to build a system that's like Google Maps or any mapping system, sure, but we need to start at that parcel level. We need to get down to the actual property level. So originally to map the tax foreclosure auction, we started a website called whydon'tweownthis.com, kind of asking this rhetorical question of like, why don't we own this stuff? This stuff's out here, it's vacant, it's empty, it's in the public hands now because through disinvestment, it's gone through the foreclosure process, nobody bought it, the city owns it, but even though the public owns it, the public's not using it at all. So we built kind of like, we think about it like X-ray glasses, X-ray glasses for a city. You go to Why Don't We Own This and you look at Detroit, and suddenly you see layers of information like this. So this ridiculously colorful splotch here is actually the state of property tax payment and collection in Detroit. Everything that is yellow is 6 months or more behind on its property taxes. Everything that's orange is currently foreclosable, meaning it has not paid property taxes in 3 years. And everything red was foreclosed on last year. And a lot of the blank ones have already been foreclosed on in prior years. So you add it up and all the money on the books right now, you've got $500 million in uncollected property tax revenue, and you start looking at it this way, and nobody has really had a view of this situation in the city before. You start mixing this with this awareness that Detroit's got lots of blight, it's got lots of vacant properties, and oh yeah, it just recently became the largest municipal bankruptcy in the United States of America. I wonder why. Maybe we should build some tools to manage that information better so we can see what's going on with it. Let's see, so zooming in to show you now, and I guess I should say here too, so through building this system independently, we started to get, well, at first we were not very well received by certain departments in the city, which is kind of understandable because we were these kind of independent civic tech folks who were like, can we have data to show people please, and why, and who are you, and all this kind of stuff. But we began to become a really essential resource for neighborhood organizations and people in the city who were trying to get their hands on information like this, and have become more recently over the last year or so a tool that's used by both city government and residents in the city of Detroit. And our kind of North Star, our mission has kind of become building tools that are used by both sides. So kind of symmetry between what the city's using and how the city understands itself, the city government understands itself, and how people understand their neighborhood. So as an example here, so here's obviously the city view. We build tools where you can get down to your neighborhood level. So here's a neighborhood called City Airport, which is around an unused airport in the center of Detroit. Here's the property tax situation there. Here's a mixture. This is overlaying information about what the city of Detroit itself owns in this area. And now suddenly you start to get this picture about what the possible land use futures are for an area, who you contact in particular if you want to buy and invest and develop inside of an area, and also the ability to drill down to like, kind of think about it like building out like a Facebook profile page, for lack of a better term, for a neighborhood and for a property, down to the property level. So drilling down, here's a property that's recently in the auction. It's a very feral house that actually has a tree growing out of the front of it right here. And to give you a sense of how quickly and why it's so important, why it was so important in Detroit to get on top of tracking property problems and property situations, one of my colleagues, Alex, has put together a blog using the Google Street View. Now lets you go back in time. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but like you can go back to like 2008 in some situations. And so he's been going through Street View and finding interesting views of neighborhoods and streets that over the course of just a few years you can watch deteriorate and fall down slowly. And I want to say this point. I don't want to harp on what gets called ruin porn in Detroit, right? So just looking at stuff like this, because Detroit is not all this, but unfortunately there is a lot of this in Detroit. And the project that we are recently coming off of and still really getting deeper into was over the winter we were tasked with helping do a citywide property survey in Detroit where for the first time we would go out and help develop a picture, property by property, how many blighted buildings are there, how many unoccupied buildings are there, how many vacant lots with dumping. And to do that, we had to send out a team of surveyors physically into the streets with a mobile application we built called Blexting, which is a conjunction of blight plus texting, where people would go, see the parcels in front of them on a map, click the parcel that they're looking at, start the survey, take a picture, and start to go down a question tree of, is there a structure here? Is it a lot? Is it occupied? Is it unoccupied? Is there dumping there? Is it fire damaged or open to trespass? And I want to show you a short video here that describes the process, which I think this is the first time something like this has been done before, that's involved so many different partners from, so many different partners from the government side and the foundation side and the private side and residents of a city to combine a civic technology with a civic engagement program, and that involved residents of the city going out together using technology to collect information that is now in the process of being used to do something tremendous and massive. In this case, help clean up a lot of really troubled properties in the city of Detroit. So I'll give you a sense of the color of how this program worked.
The Blight Task Force is a group of philanthropic, business, and political leaders who are really coming up with actionable, on-the-ground solutions that are going to help solve these problems of blight today, not 10 years from now, not 15 years from now. These are actions that are going to be taken immediately to start getting rid of this problem in the city.
Typically, blight can refer to a lot of things. Regularly, it refers to like structures, so abandoned buildings, remnants of buildings, walls that are still standing where there used to be buildings. But it can mean like dumping on a site, just anything that's unsightly in a neighborhood could constitute as blight. Anything you wouldn't want there.
If you don't deal with the challenge of blight right now, when you have the opportunity to do it, the city may not recover the way that it could.
What you need to do with blight is attack it right away. You can't just rid out sections of it. You got to start working from the inside out.
There's now a coordinated approach to removing all blight within the city of Detroit. It was important that residents that lived in each of these neighborhoods had an opportunity to get involved.
We took teams of residents and sent them out into the city to survey their own neighborhoods and understand exactly what's going on. The surveyors, they came in the morning, they got their tablets, they would meet up with their teams, get their assignments, so what area of the city they were going to be going to, get in the cars with their drivers, drive to that area, and they'd start taking pictures of every single house. They had a very specific set of criteria that they were looking to evaluate each building on.
Is there a house on site? Yes. Is residential. It's in good condition. It's occupied.
We, for the first time, had real-time information coming out about property information in the city, feeding into a system that was combined with data from the city, the county, the state, and even the feds to really understand what's going on in the city.
If you don't have the data, then it's really difficult to come up with recommendations that make any sense.
We're going to have an incredible amount of information about how to actually use data-driven decisions to fight blight in the city of Detroit.
Once the blight is removed, all sorts of potential and possibilities will exist.
Kids are going to be able to walk to school without having to worry about what's in that abandoned house next to them. Property values are going to go up.
We can be proud of our city once again and our neighborhoods.
It could totally change the quality of life for people in an entire neighborhood.
Once we start removing the blight, I think everyone in the world is really going to see what Detroit's really made of.
So that's a project called Motor City Mapping, which basically was my winter. I think we're all still kind of shocked that we're actually able to help execute this, working with a bunch of partners. It was 150 surveyors that drove around, one driver, 2 surveyors per car, in the snowiest winter in recorded Detroit history, which is kind of crazy. Over the course of, I think it was 37 work days, we're able to survey 377,000 properties in the city and create this ultra-high parcel level resolution map of what's a structure, what's a lot, what's unoccupied, what's occupied, what's severely blighted, what do we know needs to be worked on, and then cross-reference that against many other data sets. So I get excited about this stuff, so I'm trying to tell the story well, but sometimes I got to backtrack on the thing. So as part of this program, what we've been able to do, as part of bringing government and people into the same kind of system to share data with each other, we've also had this opportunity, like the filing cabinets I showed up front that every different department has, to help bring different departments together. So for the first time, we're in the process of helping the Dangerous Buildings Department, Buildings and Safety, get data and share data with the fire department, or the land bank, or planning and development, or neighborhood resident groups who have plans and lists and everything else within their own areas, and then synthesize these, organize these things in the same place so that finally we can have a deep, actionable conversation about stuff in the city of Detroit. MotorCityMapping.org website currently has data from the report that shows things like, well, I guess I should go over, not hide some of the leads, so like what we found during the report. So looks like the screen's a little cut off there, but about 50,000 unoccupied properties, 11,000 possibly unoccupied properties, whole bunch of structural fire damage, dumping, and now, and if you look at the report that's listed off here, this was used in a really big comprehensive blight analysis and action plan, which is now being used to help try and get funding from government, from private parties, and the numbers on this stuff for the cleanup is really, really big, but it's really important, and now that we have the finite numbers, now that we have the information, even though those numbers are very large, we can help start making sense about like, whew, that's a lot of money that you guys need to do this, but now you've got a number and an action plan behind it where we can start getting on top of some of these problems that without the information technology component were essentially intractable. And where we're at now is as a company with these things, so we're deep into and focused on Detroit, but we recently did start to launch Why Don't We Own This Is in different cities around the country. We've got another sort of North Star goal of trying to put every parcel in the country online, and so that people local to those areas, those municipalities, can add more and more data sets to them. And if they choose to do so, they could do citywide surveys like happened in Detroit, or they can focus on the particular land use issue in their own area, and including New York City being on here, which is kind of fun. So different ways to slice and dice and view the data and drop down to buildings. So here we are. Thank you, New York University, for hosting us today. But again, I think we're so immersed in what's happening in Detroit, but every different place has its own flavor of what's interesting or what kind of problems happen there or what kind of missing opportunities happen around land use. So if those of you who did not know the word parcel before this morning, I don't know, maybe 2015 will be the year of the parcel. We're suddenly be like, oh my God, did you guys know the planet was made out of parcels, and they all have information about them, and they're all really important. So if you guys want to stay in touch on things, and I hope you do, because this adventure is not fully written. I got to get my butt back to Detroit because the work is really just starting there. We've got so much work to do to take this information technology and put it into practice with real things happening in the real world. And I hope you guys follow along. And you can find us at makeloveland.com and Make Loveland on Twitter. That's kind of our Loveland was taken, so we're Make Loveland. So hope you enjoy that. But thank you very much for your time and for inviting me.